Wes Streeting, the opposition health secretary, has got quite dewy-eyed about the plans that Labour has got for the NHS, and he's quite dismissive of the Conservative treatment of the NHS. He says the Conservatives cut 2,000 GPs and now patients find it impossible to get an appointment when they need one. Among those patients waiting too long for an appointment will be serious conditions going missed. He's quite right, of course. People find it very difficult to get GP appointments now. The Times has led today on the front page with a story that it now takes a month in many cases to get a GP appointment. It's absurd. But I'd like to know quite how Wes Streeting gets this idea that Conservatives cut 2,000 GPs. Where did they go to? If they suddenly lost their job, where did they go to? And the process of recruiting new GPs is not something you do overnight. It's something that takes 6 to 8 years to recruit and then train a GP. So Wes Streeting's ambitions are perhaps just words, and can they deliver? Can the Labour Party actually deliver as we face another junior doctors' strike, which is going to go on for a week as the temperatures plunge across the UK? Can we deliver support for the NHS? Because the real problem with the NHS is that it needs more money. It needs more money because it's overstaffed by bureaucrats. You notice it's never the bureaucrats who go on strike. Never the bureaucrats. And look at how much the bureaucrats generally are paid for what little they do. And I know, I've been in hospital and I've suffered from bad bureaucracy in hospital on each occasion that I've been there. Bad bureaucracy. So you're not going to find me defending the bureaucrats in any way. But it seems to me that both sides of the House of Parliament would prefer to talk about Rwanda than to talk about the NHS. The NHS is eclipsed by the small boats. It's absurd. And government ministers, well, Wes Streeting is busy talking, but the government minister, his equal, I don't even know what that person's name is at the moment, hiding behind a fridge probably, or in a fridge, rather than dealing with the pressing problems. The issue is a lack of funding, and that comes down to one solution, and the country, the government needs to cut the biggest cost, and that is to trim bureaucracy. But nobody dares to say that because it's like almost taking out one of our own, isn't it? At the moment, there's a rise in private healthcare, and particularly younger people are diving into private healthcare because they cannot depend on seeing a GP when they want to. So they can go to these private health online GPs, but the problem is their scope is highly limited. And even if you get a private health package, it's often utterly dependent on a GP referral. So you still come back to the problem that the NHS GPs are integral to the working of whichever health system you want. We've seen a rise in excess deaths. That's a rise in deaths from preventable disease. Why? Because people can't get hold of a GP. They can't go to see a GP except at such a length, at such a wait. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be available at such and such a time in a month's time. I don't have a calendar like that. At the drop of a hat, somebody wants a lesson, and I'm afraid that takes priority over everything else. There are fewer fully qualified doctors today, and that's not because the Conservatives cut 2,000 doctors. It's because many doctors would prefer to work abroad where it's significantly more secure. significantly more secure, where indeed the doctors can get on with doctoring rather than doing the bureaucracy that the bureaucrats in the NHS can't be bothered to do. I am appalled. The amount of bureaucracy that my friends who are doctors seem to be expected to do in their GP surgeries or even in hospitals, and yet there are these people lording it over the hospitals, particularly, lording it over GP surgeries who have no medical training at all. And as I say, the junior doctors are about to walk out on strike for a week as temperatures plunge. Steve Brine, I think, a Conservative MP, points out to the drift in younger people going to online private GP services. But that isn't a solution either. The Times reports to people, at least one person who they name, who killed themselves after waiting 3 weeks for a GP appointment, which never materialised. People dying for want of a GP appointment, and yet, the government arses on about Rwanda. There are more important things than paying £1 million, £8 million a day to house refugees who could as easily be working in the community, who could as easily be contributing their own tax. And yet, this is what our present government is bellyaching over, and we cannot fund our own health service. We cannot make it work because we're frittering money. We're giving it to Rwanda. We're giving it to France. We're giving it to hotel chains who otherwise would collapse and deserve to collapse because they're pretty useless. Have you stayed in one of these hotels? I have, and I wouldn't again. We need to work out what is our priority. And our priority is the cost of living and the NHS. And everything else should take second place. And yet, that's not what Rishi Sunak believes. And it's certainly not the language that we hear from Sir Keir Starmer. Both of them seem to think that immigration is what keeps us up at night. It doesn't. What keeps us up at night is, an ache in our legs, a suspicion that we've got something seriously wrong with us, and we cannot see a GP, and we cannot access vaccines, we cannot access flu jabs. The whole thing doesn't work. And so what do? We lock ourselves at home. We effectively impose our own lockdown because it's too dangerous to venture outside. This is not the way to live. And if this is what we've been driven to by the Conservative government, is the Labour government promising us anything better? Not on the rhetoric we've heard. On the rhetoric we've heard, no. And do they have the money to sort out the NHS? You can't just simply keep piling on money to the NHS in the hope that it's going to get better. It's not. You have to get rid of the stuff that doesn't work, and that's bureaucratic. The bureaucracy does not work. I know some of the bureaucrats. I cannot believe that they're in such positions of authority and commanding such an income. But as I say, do they ever go on strike? No. Do they ever worry about where they're going to park outside the hospital? No. It's the nurses who slave away at the bedside. It's the junior doctors who are doing double shifts and exhausted, who slave away. They can't park. They don't have a decent income. They aren't secure. And they get criticised for thinking that it would be better off to go and work in Greece. Of course it would.